Chapter 1. A strange chill in the air. "Why are you home so early?" my wife Melissa asked, her voice sharp with surprise, not joy. The words didn't sting immediately. I just stepped through the front door, my steel-toed boots still dusty with drywall dust and cold air clinging to my coat. I blinked at her, expecting a smile, a hug, maybe even a "hey, babe." But there she was, standing in the kitchen, phone clutched tightly in one hand like it was more important than anything I could have brought through the door. "Got off early," I said, offering a tired smile. "Boss said we hit quota. Let the crew leave after lunch." She didn't return the smile. Her eyes flicked behind me to the door, as if she was expecting someone else to follow me in. Her hand moved slightly, angling the phone downward. "Everything okay?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. Melissa tucked her blonde hair behind her ear. "Yeah, just didn't expect you." I was about to start cleaning. Cleaning. She never cleaned at 2:30 p.m. on a Friday. She was usually mid-scroll on Pinterest or binge-watching true crime shows when I got home. Something in her tone was off, flat, almost irritated. I glanced at the countertops. Spotless. The whole kitchen already looked cleaner than usual. "Sophie around?" I asked, scanning the living room. "She's upstairs napping. Long day at school." I set my lunch cooler down and walked toward the stairs. Melissa didn't stop me, but I could feel her eyes trailing me, watching, like I was doing something wrong just by being home. The moment I saw Sophie asleep in her room, a soft pink glow from her night light and her stuffed bunny tucked under her chin, my tension eased a little. She was my anchor, my purpose. No matter what kind of day I had, 10 hours in the cold on scaffolding or 12 pushing concrete, one look at her made it all feel worth it. I tiptoed back downstairs. Melissa was in the kitchen again, this time pretending to shuffle mail. Her phone sat screen down on the counter, which was rare. She was the kind of person who always had it face up, even during dinner. "You all right?" I asked, leaning on the counter. "Yeah, just tired." I noticed the faint outline of makeup around her eyes. Not smudged, not from earlier in the day. It looked fresh. She'd reapplied it recently. But she hadn't gone out today, as far as I knew. I tilted my head. "You get all dressed up to vacuum the floor?" She narrowed her eyes. "Seriously?" I held up my hands. "Just joking." She rolled her eyes and turned away, muttering something under her breath that I didn't catch. That was the moment it hit me, not a punch to the face, more like a cold drip sliding down your spine. Something in the air felt different, like I was an intruder in my own home. My fingers tapped nervously on the counter. Maybe it was just stress. Holidays coming up. Bills. Long hours. I tried to rationalize it like I always did. Trying to bridge the awkwardness, I pulled a little folded drawing from my pocket, Sophie's crayon sketch of our family. I had stuck in my wallet that morning after she handed it to me. She'd drawn me tall and wide-shouldered, her tiny figure holding my hand, and Melissa with a huge yellow sun above her head. "She gave me this today," I said, sliding it toward Melissa. She barely looked at it. "Cute. Sophie worked hard on it." "Yeah, I said it was cute." I nodded slowly, tucking the paper away again. The silence stretched. I cleared my throat. "You, been texting someone important today? You were kind of glued to your phone earlier." Her eyes snapped up. "Excuse me? I just noticed. You seem busy." "Jesus, Jake. I was talking to my sister about Christmas plans." "I don't need to explain every damn message I send." "Didn't say you did," I replied, keeping my voice calm. She huffed and grabbed her phone, walking past me. As she brushed by, I caught a faint scent of cologne, not the kind I wear. I stared after her, something tightening in my chest. That night, I sat on the couch with Sophie curled up against me, watching an old animated Christmas movie. Melissa stayed in the bedroom, door half closed, giggling on the phone more than once. When I asked her to come join us, she said she was just tired and not in the mood for cartoons. Even Sophie noticed. "Is Mommy mad?" she whispered, resting her head on my arm. "No, sweetheart," I lied. "She's just sleepy." But I knew better. Something had shifted. We used to laugh together on Friday nights, pop popcorn, and let Sophie stay up past bedtime. Lately, those moments had vanished. Her warmth had cooled into something distant, almost mechanical. I tried to play it off. Stress. Hormones. Maybe I was overthinking things. It wouldn't be the first time I got inside my own head after a long work week. The next few days offered no clarity. Melissa was on her phone constantly, smiling at texts she wouldn't show me, locking the screen when I entered the room. She started going to the gym again, but never came back sweaty. When I offered to go with her, she laughed it off. And then George started coming around. My younger brother had always been a bit of a mess, charming, reckless, unemployed more often than not. He'd been couch surfing for years. We hadn't been close in a long time. But suddenly he was here a lot. Just stopping by, he'd say, cracking open a beer from my fridge like it was his own. Melissa never seemed annoyed. In fact, she lit up when he walked in. They laughed more than usual. Private jokes. Quick glances. I told myself I was imagining things. I had to be. No way she'd ever cross that line. And George? He might have been a selfish bastard, but even he wouldn't sink that low. Would he? That night, as I lay beside her in bed, she turned her back to me without a word. I reached out, resting my hand gently on her hip, hoping for a sign of life. She shifted away. I stared at the ceiling, the fan above spinning in lazy, hypnotic circles. The silence between us had grown louder than any fight. And I knew, somehow, without proof, without hearing it aloud, I was losing her. But I wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. Not yet. Chapter 2. The door is closed. Can we just crash at the house for the night? Jake asks, cradling Sophie, shivering on the porch. The snow had begun falling hard again, heavy flakes blurring the night as Jake tightened his grip on Sophie, holding her close against the wind. Her tiny arms were wrapped around his neck, and her cheek rested against his shoulder, pink from the cold. They had just driven back from his mother's house, an hour across slick country roads where the heater barely kept up and the radio sputtered static between Christmas carols. He hadn't wanted to stay long. His mom's health wasn't great, and the small trailer she lived in couldn't comfortably fit them both. He figured Melissa would have the fireplace going by the time they got home. Maybe cocoa on the stove, Sophie's pajamas laid out. He hadn't expected to be standing outside. He knocked again, louder. His knuckles stung from the cold. The porch light flicked on with a click. The door cracked open. But it wasn't Melissa. It was George. His younger brother stood there, shirtless under a flannel robe, smug grin already curling on his lips. The smell of cologne and bourbon drifted out behind him. The warm glow of Christmas lights flickered inside, casting the hallway in gold and red. George! Jake blinked, taken aback. What the hell are you? George cut him off, leaning casually against the doorframe. Evening, big bro. Jake shifted Sophie's weight. She stirred against his shoulder, mumbling. I'm just trying to get her in from the cold, Jake said, his voice low. Can we come inside? George's grin didn't fade. If anything, it grew. There's no room for you. Jake blinked. He stared at his brother, confused. What? I said. George stepped forward, opening the door a little wider. There's no room for you. From behind him, Melissa appeared. She wasn't wearing pajamas or a robe. She was dressed in a tight red sweater, black leggings, makeup done, hair curled like she was going somewhere special. Or had already been. She didn't look shocked to see Jake. She didn't even look sorry. Melissa, Jake said, his voice cracking just slightly. It's freezing. Sophie's half asleep. What's going on? Melissa crossed her arms. You should have called. I live here. You moved out. A while ago. I dropped Sophie and me off at Mom's for the afternoon. That's all. I told you that. Melissa shrugged. Things change. Jake stepped closer, boots crunching snow on the porch. You're seriously not going to let us in? On Christmas Eve? George raised an eyebrow. My house now. Jake turned to him slowly. You're what? George leaned against the doorframe again, cool as ever. My house. My rules. My wife. Jake's stomach twisted. Say that again. George reached behind the door and casually picked up a brochure, folded, crisp, as if it had been waiting. He slapped it against Jake's chest. Shelters got heat. Should still be open. Good luck, man. Jake stared down at it. St. Jude's Transitional Living Program. A place for addicts, runaways, and people with nowhere else to go. He didn't move. Melissa hadn't said a word. She stood just behind George, unmoving, silent. Her gaze didn't shift to Sophie, not once. Not even when their daughter whimpered softly and buried her head into Jake's neck. "You're seriously doing this?" Jake asked, voice shaking. No response. George stepped forward suddenly and gave Jake a hard shove. Not violent, just enough to make his boots skid against the icy porch. Enough to humiliate. Jake stumbled back, gripping Sophie tighter. "Bye, loser," George said, with a smile that made Jake's blood boil. He looked to Melissa one last time, hoping, praying for some flicker of humanity, of regret. She didn't flinch, didn't even blink. He swallowed the rage, the disbelief, the ache. He couldn't blow up, not with Sophie watching, half asleep in his arms, trusting him to make this okay. So he turned. The snow hit harder now, wind slicing across the street as the porch light clicked off behind him. He stepped down into the snow, boots crunching one step at a time. Each footfall felt heavier than the last. Sophie stirred again. "Daddy, are we home?" He kissed her forehead. "Not yet, baby." The house behind him stood tall, warm light glowing in the windows. Somewhere inside, a Christmas song played faintly, muffled behind thick walls and betrayal. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He already knew that everything he thought he had, his home, his wife, his brother, had been taken from him the moment that door closed. So Jake walked. Into the dark. Into the cold. Into the night. Chapter 3. Shelter of Shame. The motel room stank of stale cigarettes and lemon-scented disinfectant. A broken heater coughed lukewarm air into the cracked walls, barely cutting through the bitter cold that clung to Jake's clothes. He set Sophie down gently on the bed, her tiny body limp with exhaustion. The faded cartoon blanket felt thin, almost see-through, but it was all they had. He pulled it up over her shoulders and tucked it tight around her. She blinked up at him, eyes puffy, lips chapped. "Where's Mommy?" Jake hesitated. She had things to do tonight. "But it's Christmas," Sophie whispered. He forced a smile. "I know, sweetheart. But I'm here, okay? Daddy's not going anywhere." She nodded, sleep already dragging her eyes shut. Within moments, her breathing slowed. Jake knelt beside the bed, brushing her soft brown hair back from her forehead. "I'm so sorry, baby," he whispered, his voice cracking. He rose slowly, boots heavy with melted snow and mud. The motel floor creaked under his weight as he moved toward the small table by the window. A single lamp flickered with a soft hum, casting weak shadows on the peeling wallpaper. He sat down, staring at the silence. His coat was soaked through. His fingers, raw and red, throbbed from carrying Sophie through the wind. He hadn't eaten since breakfast, but food was the last thing on his mind. How the hell did we get here? He gripped the sides of the chair, forcing himself to breathe. His thoughts twisted like a knot in his stomach, memories and moments overlapping, suffocating. He remembered the first Christmas they spent in that house. Melissa had decorated the tree herself, red and gold, perfectly coordinated. She insisted on the nice dishes for dinner, even though it was just the two of them. They laughed when Sophie tried to eat mashed potatoes with her hands, barely a year old. Back then, she looked at him like he was someone worth loving. His eyes burned. When had that look disappeared? He'd started noticing the distance months ago. She stopped asking about his day. They went from, "I love you" before bed to just rolling over in silence. He chalked it up to stress. Life. He worked 12-hour shifts most weeks. Construction didn't care about your home life. The house payments, groceries, daycare, it all sat on his shoulders. He did it for them. Every time he came home, dead on his feet, he told himself it was worth it. Because he was building something. Stability. Safety. A future. And all along, Melissa had been building an exit. His fists clenched on the table. He could still hear George's voice. "My house now. My wife." Ball rose in his throat. How long had they been sneaking around? A month? A year? Was it happening under his roof while he was sweating through double shifts? He looked over at Sophie, curled up, peaceful. She had no idea. Jake stood and walked slowly to the bathroom, keeping the light off. He sat on the edge of the tub, head in his hands. He felt empty. Not angry. Not yet. Just hollow. The kind of pain that doesn't come with yelling or fists. It just sinks deep into your bones and makes you question everything you thought was real. The drip from the faucet echoed in the darkness like a metronome of failure. His wife didn't want him. His brother had taken his place. His home, the one he worked his damn life for, was now just a memory. And he had no idea what came next. A floorboard creaked behind him. He looked up. Sophie stood in the doorway, rubbing her eyes with the sleeve of her jacket. "Daddy," she whispered. He forced his voice to steady. "Yeah, baby?" She took a step in. "Why does a mommy want us?" The question shattered him. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. She looked so small, so confused, clinging to a piece of her world that had just collapsed, looking to him for answers he didn't have. Jake knelt down and pulled her into his arms. "Oh, baby girl, mommy just—" His throat caught. "Mommy's not thinking right now. But I do. I want you more than anything in the whole world." Her fingers tightened in his shirt. "Are we going to live here now?" "No, honey. This is just for tonight." She nodded against his chest. He carried her back to the bed, tucking her in once more, kissing her forehead twice. She drifted off quickly, the kind of sleep only children can manage after devastation, simple, deep, and unknowing. Jake stood in the middle of the room, staring blankly at the shadows. He couldn't sleep. Instead, he walked back to the bathroom, closed the door, and sat on the cold tile floor. The silence pressed against him again. No sound but his breathing, his heartbeat. And then, slowly it cracked. The first tears slid down without warning. Then another. Then the flood came. He covered his face with both hands and wept, loud, broken sobs that echoed in the tiny room. His shoulders shook, his chest heaved, and everything poured out. The betrayal, the shame, the helplessness. He cried until his voice was hoarse and his face was wet. And still, it wasn't enough. Chapter 4. Unraveling the Lie. The lawyer's office smelled like old wood and disinfected. The fluorescent lighting buzzed faintly above Jake's head as he sat stiffly in the worn leather chair, his calloused hands resting on his thighs. Across the desk sat Mr. Darby, a thin, balding man in a navy suit with gold-rimmed glasses and a permanent frown etched into his face. "So, you're telling me," Jake said, trying to keep his voice even, "that my name isn't on the deed anymore?" Mr. Darby tapped a few keys on his keyboard, then turned his monitor slightly toward Jake. "Not as of 5 months ago, no. The property was transferred from joint ownership to sole ownership under your wife's name. You signed a quitclaim deed." Jake blinked. "No, I didn't. I never signed anything like that." Darby adjusted his glasses. "Well, your signature's on the file. It was notarized too." Jake leaned forward, blood roaring in his ears. "Let me see it." Darby pulled a file folder from the drawer and handed over a printed page. There it was. His name, scrawled at the bottom in black ink. Except it wasn't quite his signature. It was close enough to fool someone not looking too hard, but not his. "I didn't sign this," Jake said firmly. Darby gave a slow nod. "Then it may have been forged." Jake's jaw clenched so tightly it ached. He stared at the paper, his mind racing back. 5 months ago, that was right around the time he'd been working that highway job. He'd been out of the house 12, 13 hours a day. Melissa had offered to handle the bills, take care of the refinancing, even said something about saving on taxes. He hadn't thought twice. She was his wife. Why wouldn't he trust her? He slumped back in the chair, nausea curling in his gut. This wasn't just betrayal. This was premeditated, legal, strategic. She hadn't just cheated on him. She'd stolen the ground out from under his feet, quietly, while smiling across the dinner table. "Is there anything I can do?" he asked, voice low. Darby frowned. "If the signature was forged, yes, we can challenge it. But that will take time and proof. And, well, fighting it could drag out in court for months, maybe years." Jake nodded slowly, the paper still trembling slightly in his hand. He left the office feeling like he'd been punched in the chest. Outside, the sky had turned gray, the wind biting as it sliced through his jacket. The weight of it all pressed down like concrete. He didn't just lose his wife, his home, or his trust in his own brother. He'd lost the legal rights to his life's work. When he got back to the motel, Sophie was coloring at the small round table with crayons Jake picked up from the dollar store. "Hi, Daddy," she chirped without looking up. "Look, I drew our old house." He forced a smile. "Looks great, baby." She pointed to a stick figure on the porch. "That's you. You're holding cupcakes." He chuckled despite the lump in his throat. Cupcakes, huh? I told Mommy that you were the best at baking, even better than the bakery. She paused. Mommy said she doesn't like that house anymore. Jake froze for half a second. I think she's wrong, Sophie added. I liked it better when you were there. Jake reached out and touched her hair, brushing it gently. I liked it better too. That night, after Sophie fell asleep, Jake called Carlos, a longtime coworker and friend. He didn't plan to talk about the details. But the second Carlos answered, Jake found himself unloading everything. Carlos whistled. Man, that's cold. Switching the deed behind your back? She playing chess while you were out here pouring concrete? Yeah, Jake muttered, staring at the motel ceiling. And I handed her the pieces. Carlos went quiet for a second. You still got access to your shared accounts? Your phone plan? Anything? I think so. She hasn't changed the passwords yet. Then listen, broke, document everything. Start digging. Text messages. Photos. Bank records. If they were sneaky enough to take your name off the house, they left breadcrumbs somewhere. Jake sat up slowly. You think it's been going on that long? Longer. Nobody wakes up one day and decides to screw their husband and shack up with his brother unless they've been planning it. They're arrogant, man. And sloppy. People like that get careless when they think they've already won. Jake hung up and stared at the wall for a long time before reaching for his old laptop. The thing wheezed like it might die on startup, but it worked. He logged into their shared cloud storage. Melissa used it for everything: photos, backups, notes. What he found made his stomach turn. There were dozens of photos, selfies of Melissa and George at restaurants Jake had never been invited to. Pictures of them at the beach, in his backyard. Even one of George sitting in Jake's recliner, holding a drink with Melissa perched on the arm, smiling. Dates stamped on those photos went back over a year. His hand trembled as he clicked each one. The fake smiles. The intimate glances. The same outfit Melissa wore on nights. She told Jake she was going out with the girls. He scrolled through their phone bill next. Text logs between Melissa and George were constant. Late nights. Middle of workdays. One thread had nearly 70 texts in a single hour. He backed up everything, screenshots, timestamps, folder copies. And then he found the receipts. They'd open a credit card in his name. Furniture stores, hotel bookings, bars. Over $7,000 in debt. George had been using Jake's name to furnish the house he was pushed out of. Jake never even saw the bill. Melissa had been collecting the mail. As the hours passed, his grief hardened into something else. Resolve. He wasn't going to scream. Wasn't going to knock on their door and lose his mind. No, he was going to build his case, brick by brick. And when the time was right, he'd make them feel what it meant to lose something you thought was yours. Chapter 5. The truth hurts quietly. The motel room had become more of a holding cell than a temporary shelter. Every morning started the same way. Jake would wake before dawn, quietly slip on his work boots, and write a short note for Sophie, some silly drawing, or a reminder that he loved her more than pancakes, more than cartoons, more than anything. He'd leave it by her cereal bowl before heading out to the site. Work used to feel like purpose. Now it felt like survival. Hammering nails, lifting drywall, grinding rebar, it dulled the ache in his chest. Each strike was a breath, each load a distraction from the weight he carried. But even the noise of drills and yelling foremen couldn't drown out the things that lived in his head now. Melissa's cold eyes behind George's shoulder, the brochure hitting his chest, the lock clicking behind them. He'd lie to himself some days, tell himself this would pass, that maybe it wasn't real. Maybe it was just a nightmare stretched over too many hours of overtime. But then he'd come back to the motel, find Sophie sitting in the window watching for him, and the illusion would fall apart all over again. "Daddy," she asked one night while coloring, her voice soft like she already knew it would hurt him, "why does Uncle George hug Mommy so much when you're working?" Jake froze mid-step. His hand gripped the back of the motel chair as if he'd trip without it. He turned slowly. "What do you mean, baby?" She didn't look up. Her crayon scratched slowly over paper. "Like a lot. More than you. Mommy says they're just close because they talk about things you don't understand." Jake sat down across from her, every muscle tight. "I see," he said gently, managing a smile. "Did she say anything else?" Sophie frowned. "She said you're always tired. And serious." He swallowed hard. Well, grown-ups say things sometimes they don't really mean. Did you hug her too much? Sophie asked. He chuckled, a sharp, bitter sound that came out without permission. Maybe not enough. She went back to coloring, humming a Christmas tune, as if she hadn't just cracked open his chest. Jake turned his face toward the window, so she wouldn't see the tears threatening to rise. He remembered all the times he'd called Melissa from job sites, covered in sweat, chalked dust on his neck, asking if she needed anything on the way home. She always said no. She always said she was fine. Meanwhile, she and George were playing house behind his back, hugging, laughing, sharing jokes he wasn't invited to anymore. He felt it now, rage, like a fire barely contained behind his ribs. But Sophie needed peace, not a broken father. So he held it in. Every sharp word, every growl in his throat. He buried it beneath his smile. Later that night, after Sophie had fallen asleep on the motel bed, curled under the scratchy blanket like a caterpillar in a cocoon, Jake stepped outside into the cold. The night air slapped his face, stung his hands, cleared his thoughts. He pulled out his phone. No new voicemails. No missed calls. Nothing. He tried texting Melissa twice that week. Once about Sophie's schoolwork. Once about a missing insurance card. Both messages went unanswered. On the third attempt, the screen popped up. Message failed to send. This number has blocked you. He stared at the screen, jaw clenched so tight it pulsed in his ears. She didn't just take the house. She didn't just take his brother. She erased him like he never mattered. A buzz came through immediately after. Not from her. George. Jake didn't want to open it. But he did. She said you were boring, bro. He blinked slowly. A long, cold silence settled in his gut. Another message came seconds later. Guess you should have worked less and satisfied her more. He inhaled once, deep, heavy, sharp through the nose. The kind of breath you take when your entire body screams to react, but your mind says, not yet. He didn't respond. Another ding. A photo. George and Melissa, his arm around her waist, both holding cocktails, clinking glasses. Melissa wore the necklace Jake bought her for their anniversary last year. Jake stared at it. His thumb hovered over the screen. Every cell in his body begged him to lash out, to say something, to do something. But instead, he opened a folder labeled Evidence and saved the entire conversation. No yelling, no reply, no emotion. He simply saved it. Chapter 6. The call that changed everything. The buzzing wouldn't stop. Jake rolled over in bed, groggy and stiff from another restless night on the motel mattress. His phone lit up like a Christmas tree on the nightstand. He blinked at the screen, then frowned. 93 missed calls. His heart thudded once, slow and heavy. He sat up and rubbed his eyes. The call log scrolled endlessly. Melissa, George, mom-in-law, numbers he didn't even recognize. He hadn't heard from any of them in a week. Not since George's last mocking message. Not since Melissa blocked his number. Now suddenly, they were calling nonstop. He slid his finger across the screen and put the phone face down. He didn't want to know. Not yet. Whatever it was, they could wait. Across the room, Sophie was still asleep, curled up with her favorite stuffed bunny under the motel's scratchy covers. She had a school trip today, some holiday sing-along and cookie decorating thing. He promised her he'd pack her special lunch with the chocolate milk she liked, and even the sparkly sandwich picks she always asked for. He needed to be okay today. He dressed quietly, washed his face in the motel's sink, and poured lukewarm coffee into the old thermos he kept from work. After he dropped Sophie off, watching her run up the school steps in her bright pink coat, waving back at him with a grin that still broke his heart, Jake drove. He didn't have a destination in mind. Just away. His truck wound along a country road, tires crunching over gravel and patches of half-melted snow. The bare trees stretched like skeletons on either side of the road, and a low fog curled over the landscape like a secret being kept from the world. Eventually, he found himself pulling up to the lake. It was the same place his grandfather used to take him fishing when he was a kid, back before everything got complicated, before Melissa, before George, before all of it. The water was still and silver, reflecting the heavy gray sky. Jake stepped out of the truck and walked down to the shore. The wind sliced across the surface of the lake, carrying the faint scent of pine and cold earth. He stood there for a long time, staring at the water, breathing, just existing. For the first time in weeks, he let himself feel nothing. No anger, no pain, no sadness, just the wind and the cold and the emptiness. His phone buzzed again in his pocket. He pulled it out and nearly tossed into the lake. Voicemail. 6 new messages. The most recent was from Melissa. He hovered over the play button, thumb twitching. Finally, he hit it. Jake, I didn't know. You inherited everything. Please call me. His brows knit. He replayed it. You inherited everything. He frowned and pulled up the older voicemails. Most were frantic. One from Melissa's mother, her usual cool tone replaced by high-pitched panic. Jake, sweetheart, I don't know what's happening, but please talk to Melissa. She's just found out. It's about the will. The inheritance, your grandfather, please call back. He tapped into his email next, a cold knot forming in his chest. A new message sat unread from Davenport and Langston attorneys. He opened it. Subject: conditional activation of trust, estate of Harold S. Reeves's throat went dry. His grandfather. He skimmed, heart racing, until the words jumped out at him. Per the conditions stipulated in the trust, the amount of $3.4 million is to be released to the designated beneficiary, Jake Reeves, provided he is not legally married at the time of probate activation. Jake stared at the screen, frozen. His hands trembled. Not from the cold. Not legally married. He remembered his grandfather, sharp-witted, old-school, gruff, but weirdly warm underneath the layers of gristle. They hadn't been close the last few years. But he always said, never let a woman define your legacy. Build your own. Jake had thought it was just bitterness. But now this? Melissa. She had filed for divorce a month before she locked him out. And she hadn't known. She had no idea. By kicking him out, by rushing into George's arms, by throwing him away like garbage, she'd activated the clause herself. If she had waited, played along, pretended even a few more months, she would have gotten half. But she didn't. She didn't wait. Jake laughed. It was dry, almost manic. He stepped back from a lake and leaned against the hood of his truck. Wind whipped his jacket open, but he didn't feel the cold anymore. For weeks, he'd been treated like dirt. Lied to, discarded, humiliated. Now suddenly they wanted him. Now they knew. And the irony? He didn't need them anymore. Not Melissa. Not George. Not any of them. He slid his phone back into his coat pocket and looked out over the lake, the fog curling along the water's edge like the ghost of a man he used to be. He wasn't that man anymore. Chapter 7. The Power Shift. The old law office sat on the edge of downtown, tucked between a pawn shop and an abandoned bookstore. The paint was peeling and the parking lot was cracked, but the sign was clean and sharp. Davenport and Langston, estate law, probate, civil defense. Jake adjusted the collar of his worn work jacket and stepped inside. The receptionist, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and a velvet scarf, smiled warmly. Mr. Reeves? He nodded. Mr. Langston will see you now. He's been expecting you. The office was quiet. Mahogany panels lined the walls, and a thick smell of lemon polish and paper filled the air. Jake's boots made a soft thump against the old carpet as he entered the corner office. Behind the desk sat Thomas Langston, tall and clean-shaven, with eyes that missed nothing. Mr. Reeves, Langston greeted, rising to shake his hand. It's good to meet you in person. I knew your grandfather well. Harold was a blunt man, but he admired you more than you probably ever knew. Jake swallowed. I didn't even know he left me anything. Langston offered a small smile. That was the point. Harold didn't want you distracted. But once the probate conditions were triggered, which they now are, you're the sole beneficiary of his estate. No contest. Melissa. Langston raised a brow. As of the day she filed for divorce, voluntarily, I might add, she forfeited any marital claim to the trust. Jake nodded slowly. Langston reached into a drawer and pulled out a thick file. Now, there's something else. We reviewed the deed transfer on your former residence. And as you suspected, your signature was forged. Jake's eyes narrowed. Can I press charges? Absolutely. Not only can you pursue a civil case for fraud, but with the evidence of forgery and the misappropriation of your identity, this becomes criminal. And the house? It's in limbo now. Since Melissa and your brother signed with false authorization, the bank has already flagged the mortgage. They'll likely foreclose unless someone steps up to pay the arrears. Neither of them qualifies a loan. Jake almost smiled, but he didn't. Not yet. Langston leaned forward. We'll proceed carefully, quietly. I recommend maintaining your current silence. Let them panic. Jake nodded. That's what I was thinking. That afternoon, he made another stop, this time at the office of Avery Sharp, a private investigator recommended by Langston. Avery was in his 40s, lean and sharp-eyed, dressed like he stepped out of a detective novel. He handed Jake a folder within 15 minutes of their meeting. You're not my first cheating spouse case, Avery said, flipping open the top page. But yours is particularly ugly. Inside were color photos, Melissa and George at a cabin Jake didn't recognize. A selfie in Jake's stolen truck. Another of them lying in his bed, the headboard visible, unmistakable. George wore Jake's wristwatch in one. In another, Melissa sat on the hood of the truck in nothing but George's flannel shirt. Avery tapped the folder. I've got date stamps, metadata, and credit card logs backing these. You've got a slam-dunk case for emotional distress, vehicle theft, identity fraud, and civil damages. Jake stared at the photos in silence. He didn't feel pain. Not anymore. Only clarity. Over the next week, Jake made quiet moves. He met with a realtor on the north side of town, near Sophie's school. He didn't want anything flashy. No revenge mansion. Just a two-bedroom, modest, with a fenced-in yard and a porch that got the morning sun. I want a place where my daughter can feel like she's home, he told the agent. Somewhere I can cook breakfast and still hear her singing in her room. They found it, a small brick home with faded blue shutters and a creaky back gate. The inside was plain, but to Jake, it was sanctuary. The deal closed in 3 days. All cash. On the day he got the keys, he stood in the empty living room and stared at the sunlight stretching across the bare floor. No furniture yet. No clutter. Just peace. For the first time in months, he exhaled. He didn't speak to Melissa. Didn't respond to the text she eventually sent, panicked and pleading. He didn't respond to George either, who'd gone silent after realizing Jake wasn't biting. Instead, Jake focused on Sophie. He walked her to school, picked her up with a snack in the passenger seat, cooked dinner, painted her new room pink, read her bedtime stories under a new set of fairy lights. At night, after she slept, he'd go to his new office, an old converted storage room off the kitchen, and flip through the growing file of evidence. Photos, texts, documents. He wasn't seeking vengeance. He was building his truth. And for the first time since the cold night that locked him out, he didn't feel powerless. He felt ready. Chapter 8. Confrontation at the courthouse. The courthouse steps felt steeper than they should have. Jake adjusted his tie with one hand, gripping the folder of custody paperwork with the other. The building loomed above him, all white stone and sharp corners, the kind of place meant to feel cold and powerful. His boots echoed as he stepped inside, past metal detectors, past security, past a woman handing out tissues to another mother who couldn't stop crying. Family court, where dignity came to die and truth bled slow. He hadn't seen Melissa in person since that night on the porch, but she was waiting just down the hall, leaning against the beige wall outside the mediation room. She wore soft makeup, hair straightened, a navy dress that looked almost respectful. She smiled when she saw him, small, almost apologetic. He felt the ghost of nausea roll through his gut. Jake, she said softly, stepping toward him. Thanks for coming. He said nothing. She glanced at the file in his hand. I think we both need to remember why we're here. It's about Sophie. That's what matters. Jake stared at her like she was a stranger. She had blocked his number. She had let their daughter sleep in a motel. She had handed him a brochure for a homeless shelter on Christmas Eve. Melissa's eyes darted nervously as she fumbled to keep talking. I'm not here to fight you. I know we made mistakes, okay? Things happened. George and we were both lonely. You were never home. You were always working. I tried to hold everything together, but Jake stepped closer, voice like steel. Don't, he said. Her mouth snapped shut. The mediator, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes and a legal pad, called them in. They sat at opposite ends of the conference table, a pitcher of water and 2 cups in the middle like some kind of symbolic ceasefire. Melissa folded her hands primly. Jake laid out his evidence, every schedule, receipt, school drop-off, doctor appointment. The mediator asked standard questions first. Who Sophie stayed with? Who paid for what? What the child's needs were. Jake answered calmly. Melissa dodged. Then, near the end, came the usual bait, the emotional card. I just think we should try to keep things civil, Melissa said. I want Sophie to grow up knowing both her parents love her. I mean, don't you miss how things were? Before all this? Before it got messy. Jake's hands were steady on the table. And then, without raising his voice, without flinching, he delivered the words that had been rotting in his chest since that night in the snow. I worked myself to the bone for this family. Melissa blinked. The mediator froze mid-note. I missed birthdays, school plays, dinners because I was out breaking my back, trying to build something you could feel safe in. You think I didn't notice how you pulled away? How you smiled less? I thought it was stress. Bills. Life. So I worked harder. I bled for this family. He leaned forward. And you? You let my daughter freeze in the snow. Melissa's face went pale. You locked us out. You stood behind my brother like a coward while he handed me a brochure for a homeless shelter. On Christmas Eve, with my daughter crying in my arms. Her lips trembled. Jake, no. You don't get to Jake me. You gave my brother what I built. My truck. My bed. My home. My life. You served me betrayal like it was dinner, then had the nerve to say you were lonely? The room was silent. His voice dropped to a razor's whisper. You didn't fall into his arms. You chose this. You chose betrayal. Now live with it. Melissa looked down, visibly shaking. The mediator cleared her throat, clearly rattled. Thank you, Mr. Reeves. I believe we've heard all that's necessary. Court convened the next day. Melissa arrived in a beige suit, makeup heavier, nerves barely hidden behind a frozen smile. George sat in the back row, arms crossed, jaw tight. He wore sunglasses inside and had a phone out, scrolling, until the judge scolded him. Jake didn't look their way once. He sat straight, calm, factual. His lawyer laid everything bare, documented care, work hours, Sophie's medical records, Melissa's voluntary abandonment, the forged deed, the motel stays, the messages from George, the stolen truck. Melissa offered a tearful apology, said she was trying to rebuild, that she only left because she was confused. The judge barely blinked. The ruling came swiftly. Primary custody awarded to the father, Jake Reeves. Visitation limited. Mother to pay child support based on minimum wage earnings. Melissa gasped. George stood up, red-faced. This is a goddamn joke. The bailiff moved toward him. George threw a folder at the floor. You were nothing. Just a construction loser with calluses. She chose me. You were never enough. Jake turned his head, slowly for the first time. His expression was unreadable. George stormed out of the courtroom, cursing under his breath. Melissa stayed seated, staring blankly at her knees, hands folded tightly in her lap. Chapter 9. The Rise. Spring came slow that year, but Jake noticed it anyway. He noticed the cherry blossoms blooming near Sophie's school. He noticed the smell of cut grass in the mornings. He noticed how Sophie's giggles had gotten louder, freer, less guarded, like she finally believed the bad part was really over. And in many ways it was. He was different now. Stronger. Sharper. Not harder, but more awake. Pain did that. It refined people. His mornings began early, like they always had. But now, instead of punching a time clock for someone else, Jake walked into a modest red brick building at the edge of town with a freshly painted sign overhead. Sophie's Garage. Honest work, honest hands. He had taken a chunk of the inheritance and poured it into something that made sense. A mechanic shop, small and clean. 2 bays, a front office, a coffee machine that never worked right, and enough tools to bring any machine back from the dead. He hired 2 teens from the local vocational program, kids who reminded him of himself at 17. He didn't just teach them to fix engines. He taught them to show up on time, to shake hands properly, to own their work. Sometimes, after school, Sophie would come by and sit on the little stool in the corner, reading books or handing him wrenches like a tiny assistant. She knew the difference between a socket and a ratchet before most kids could spell them. The community noticed. Old men from the VFW came by to chat. Single moms dropped off their cars and stayed for coffee. One even brought Jake a pie, just because. And then one day, Carlos, his longtime friend from the job site, showed up with someone new. Carlos said, clapping him on the shoulder. Meet Hannah. She's the school counselor where my niece goes. Hannah smiled, genuine, no pretense. She wore jeans and a yellow cardigan and had the kind of eyes that made people feel safe. Jake wiped the grease from his hands and nodded. Nice to meet you. Carlos said you're a single dad? She asked gently. Yeah, Jake replied, glancing towards Sophie, who was busy making chalk drawings on the shop floor. Full time. Hannah looked at Sophie and smiled. She seems happy. She is. Took a while, but we got there. They didn't talk about exes, or betrayal, or courtrooms. Just coffee, books, Sophie's drawings, things that felt light. And that was enough for now. Weeks passed. Sophie's room at home was decorated with hand-drawn stars and fairy lights. Jake kept framed photos of their weekend hikes on his nightstand. He no longer kept his phone on silent. He no longer checked for missed calls from anyone that didn't matter. He was building piece by piece. So when Melissa walked into his shop one gray Thursday afternoon, it was like watching a ghost push through daylight. She looked different. Not broken exactly, but wilted, duller eyes, shoulders hunched beneath a worn coat, a purse clutched too tightly. Jake was under the hood of a truck when he saw her through the reflection of the windshield. He didn't even flinch. Jake, she said. He kept working. She stepped closer. Can we talk? He slid out from under the hood, wiped his hands, and raised an eyebrow. About what? Her voice cracked. Everything. I was stupid. George, he's gone. Took what little we had left. I lost the apartment. I've been staying with my mom. He said nothing. She looked around the garage. You did all this? With the money. Some of it. She swallowed. I made mistakes. I know that. But we were good once. Weren't we? Maybe we could start again. Try to rebuild. For Sophie. Jake laughed. Not cruelly. Not loudly. Just genuinely, like something heavy had been lifted from his chest. Then he stepped closer and looked her in the eyes. You gave up a good man for a con artist. You don't get to rewrite that ending. Chapter 10. A New Kind of Christmas. The soft glow of Christmas lights spilled through the windows of Jake's small house, casting a gentle warmth against the cold, early evening outside. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cinnamon and pine, mingling with the quiet hum of a classic holiday playlist playing softly from an old speaker. Jake stood in the living room, a strand of twinkling lights draped loosely over one arm, while Sophie, her cheeks flushed with excitement, held a glittering ornament in her small hands. Hannah, sitting nearby on the faded couch, smiled quietly, her presence gentle and steady, like a soft beacon after so much storm. Sophie, what's that one? Jake asked, setting down the lights carefully on the table. Sophie held up the ornament proudly, a tiny wreath made of craft sticks and shiny paper stars, decorated with a smattering of sequins and a bright red bow. This is our family ornament, she announced with a grin. It's got me, Daddy, Hannah, and Muffin. Hannah's eyes softened as she looked at the ornament, then at Sophie. That's a beautiful ornament, sweetheart. Muffin, the plump orange tabby cat who had adopted them months ago, stretched lazily on the windowsill, blinking sleepily as Sophie's voice carried around the room. Jake watched them, a slow smile spreading across his face. It had been a year since the snow had fallen that cold Christmas Eve, the year that had nearly shattered everything. The year he'd been pushed out into the cold with nothing but his daughter and a fading hope. But this night, this little room, full of laughter and light, was proof they had made it through. Want some help hanging it up? Hannah asked, getting to her feet. Sophie nodded enthusiastically and handed over the ornament. Together, the three of them moved to the small tree in the corner of the living room. The pine-scented branches were adorned with mismatched baubles collected over the years, some store-bought, some homemade, but all cherished. Jake carefully lifted Sophie onto his shoulders so she could place the ornament right in the center, where it would catch the light just perfectly. There, Sophie said, beaming. Right here. Perfect spot. Jake said, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. Hannah stepped back, admiring the tree. You've made a beautiful home here. Jake shrugged. It's simple, but it's ours. Hannah smiled. Sometimes simple is best. Later, after dinner, Jake found himself tucking Sophie into bed. Her small hands clutched the edge of the blanket as she looked up at him with wide, trusting eyes. Daddy, she whispered. Yes, sweetheart. This is my best Christmas. Jake's throat tightened. He knelt beside her, brushing a kiss across her forehead. Mine too, Sophie. She yawned, her eyes fluttering closed. I love you, Daddy. I love you too, kiddo. Always. He stood up slowly, leaving the soft glow of her bedside lamp behind as he closed the door quietly. Outside, the world was white and silent. Snowflakes drifted gently down from a cloudy sky, dusting the street and piling lightly on the roof of the small house. Jake pulled his coat tighter around himself and stepped onto the porch, breath fogging in the cold night air. He leaned against the railing, gazing up at the swirling snow. Memories swept over him of the cold nights spent in motels, the harsh words, the betrayal that had nearly crushed him. The cold that wasn't just from the weather, but from being pushed out by the people he trusted most. But now, there was light, warmth, hope. He looked up at the stars, peeking through the cloud cover, thinking about how far they'd come. Sometimes, he thought, you lose everything. Sometimes, you have to lose it all to understand what you're truly worth. And with Sophie's laughter echoing softly behind the door, with Hannah's quiet presence waiting to build new memories, Jake felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Sometimes, Jake whispered to the snow falling softly around him, you lose everything to learn what you're worth.